Verena Montclair stood in her wedding suite at midnight, still in her $50,000 gown, tears streaming down her face as she stared at her untouched marriage bed. The silk sheets lay pristine, undisturbed. Moonlight filtered through gauze curtains, casting silver patterns across marble floors that had witnessed countless love stories, but tonight only silence filled the opulent room. The weight of her designer dress, once a symbol of joy, now felt like chains dragging her down into confusion and heartbreak. Why? The question burned through her mind as she clutched the pearl necklace at her throat, a wedding gift from Lennox that now felt cold against her skin. Her reflection in the antique mirror showed a bride abandoned, mascara streaking down porcelain cheeks, dreams crumbling in real time. Just 12 hours earlier, this same woman had glided down the aisle of Caldwell Manor, like a vision from a fairy tale. Golden light had danced through crystal chandeliers as 300 guests rose to their feet. Her gown had swept across polished floors while classical music swelled, and when Lennox turned to face her at the altar, his dark eyes had held such tenderness that her heart had soared. "I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all my days," he had whispered during their vows, his voice strong and certain. The reception had been perfection itself. Champagne toasts, elegant dancing, laughter echoing through manicured gardens. Guests had whispered about the billionaire tech mogul finally finding his match, about how radiant the bride looked, about what a powerful couple they would become. But now, in the suffocating quiet of their honeymoon suite, those same guests were long gone. The music had faded. The flowers were wilting. Verena sank onto the velvet armchair by the window, her voluminous skirt pooling around her like spilled cream. Through the glass, she could see the estate's ancient oak trees swaying in the night breeze, their branches reaching toward stars that seemed impossibly distant. What did I do wrong? She replayed every moment since they'd entered this room. Lennox had closed the door softly behind them, his jaw tight with an emotion she couldn't read. When she'd reached for him, expecting the tender kiss that would begin their married life, he'd stepped back as if she'd burned him. I need a moment," he'd said, his voice strained. That was 3 hours ago. She could hear him moving around in the sitting room beyond the bedroom door, pacing, she thought. The soft creak of floorboards had become the soundtrack to her growing despair. Every woman dreamed of her wedding night, of feeling desired and cherished. Instead, she felt invisible. Am I not enough for him? The tears came faster now, each drop carrying years of buried insecurities she'd thought love had healed. If you've ever felt rejected when you expected love, this story will break your heart. Then heal it. Stay with me. To understand the devastation crushing Verena's heart, you need to know where her pain was born. She'd spent years believing she wasn't enough, a conviction carved into her soul during a childhood where love came with conditions. Her parents had been physically present but emotionally absent, offering criticism instead of comfort, expectations instead of encouragement. Every report card, every achievement, every desperate attempt to earn their approval had been met with indifference or demands for more. Why can't you be like your cousin Sarah? She's already valedictorian. That dress makes you look heavier than you are. If you just try harder, maybe someone would want to marry you someday. By 17, Verena had learned to smile through the ache, to laugh when she wanted to cry, to sparkle even when her heart felt like broken glass. She became an expert at hiding her wounds behind bright eyes and a quick wit. The world saw confidence. She felt like a fraud waiting to be exposed. College brought some healing, distance from toxic voices, new friendships, the discovery that her gentle nature was actually a strength. But deep inside, that scared little girl still whispered, "You're not good enough. You never will be." Meeting Lennox had changed everything, or so she'd thought. The man who now paced beyond her bedroom door carried his own invisible scars. Lennox Caldwell had built his sustainable technology empire from absolutely nothing. Not just poverty, but abandonment. His mother had left when he was 8, promising to return and never coming back. His father had drowned his grief in alcohol, leaving young Lennox to raise himself in a house that echoed with emptiness. Behind steel determination lived a man who understood pain in ways most billionaires never would. He'd learned that people left, that promises broke, that the only person you could truly count on was yourself. Success had given him power, wealth, influence, but it couldn't heal the wound that made him fear getting too close to anyone. When he'd met Verena at a charity gala 2 years ago, her genuine laughter had cut through his defenses like sunlight through storm clouds. She didn't want his money or status. She'd actually seemed nervous when she discovered who he was. Her authenticity had terrified and captivated him in equal measure. Their courtship had been a careful dance of two wounded souls learning to trust. Late-night conversations revealed shared dreams, quiet dinners uncovered hidden vulnerabilities. For the first time in his life, Lennox had wanted to let someone in completely, which made today's wedding both a triumph and a risk that left his hands shaking. Caldwell Manor had never looked more magnificent. 500 white roses adorned the chapel, while string quartets filled the air with melodies that made even cynical billionaires tear up. Verena had been breathtaking in her custom gown, a vision of grace and joy that made Lennox's chest tight with emotion he'd forgotten how to express. The guests, tech moguls, politicians, celebrities, had toasted the union with champagne that cost more than most people's cars. Everyone agreed it was the wedding of the decade, a perfect match between two extraordinary people. But perfection can be fragile. During the reception, Lennox had watched Verena charm his business associates, her smile never wavering, even when his former partner made a crude joke about wedding night expectations. He'd seen the slight flinch she'd tried to hide, the way her hand had trembled almost imperceptibly when an elderly aunt commented on how lucky she was to have caught such a successful man. Those moments had triggered something deep in his memory. Conversations they'd shared about her past, the pain she'd confided during vulnerable moments, the fears she'd whispered about not being worthy of real love. As the last guest left and the staff cleaned away the remnants of celebration, the weight of realization hit him like a physical blow. Verena's fairy tale began to crumble the moment he understood that what society expected from this night might destroy the very thing he'd vowed to protect: her healing heart. Have you ever felt like you're not enough for someone you love? Verena's about to discover something that changes everything. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked with merciless precision, each second stretching into eternity. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. The sound had become torture, marking time that should have been filled with whispered promises and tender touches. Instead, Verena sat frozen in her wedding dress, watching moonlight creep across marble floors like silver tears. The gown that had made her feel like a princess now felt like a costume for a role she'd never auditioned for again. Layers of silk and tulle wrapped around her legs like beautiful chains, the corset suddenly too tight, the pearl buttons down her spine, a reminder that she couldn't even undress herself without help. Help that wasn't coming. Lennox remained in the sitting room, and with each passing hour, the distance between them felt less like a door and more like an ocean. She could hear him moving occasionally, the soft thud of a book being set down, the quiet scrape of a chair, footsteps that never approached the bedroom. What did I do wrong? The question consumed her, feeding on every insecurity she'd spent years trying to overcome. She replayed their entrance into the suite, searching for clues. He'd been quiet during the elevator ride up, his jaw tight with tension she'd attributed to wedding day stress. When the door had closed behind them, she'd expected him to reach for her, to kiss her the way he had during their engagement when passion had made them both forget the world existed. Instead, his eyes held a vulnerability that made her heart race with questions she didn't know how to ask. I need to? I should let you get comfortable, he'd said, backing away from her outstretched hand like she carried some invisible disease. The rejection had hit her like ice water. She'd stood there in her designer gown, arms still reaching for a husband who couldn't bear to touch her, watching his face contort with an emotion she couldn't name. Pain? Fear? Regret? Was she not beautiful enough? Not worthy enough? The voices from her childhood crept back in, poisonous whispers she'd thought love had silenced forever. No man will ever truly want you. You're too broken, too needy, too much work. You're not the kind of woman men marry for love. She'd believed Lennox was different. During their courtship, he'd looked at her like she was a miracle, listened to her stories without judgment, held her through panic attacks when her past tried to drag her under. He'd made her feel worthy of love for the first time in her life. Now, as moonlight shifted across the room and shadows danced on walls that had witnessed centuries of marriages, she wondered if she'd imagined it all. Maybe he'd simply been playing a part, fulfilling an obligation. Maybe the businessman in him had calculated that she'd make a suitable wife for public appearances, but couldn't bring himself to consummate the lie. The wedding dress grew heavier with each passing moment, the weight of tradition and expectation crushing her chest. Every movie, every book, every conversation with married friends had prepared her for this night. Champagne and rose petals, whispered endearments and gentle hands, the moment when two became one. Reality was silence so thick it felt suffocating. By 4 a.m, her tears had dried into salt tracks on her cheeks. Her carefully styled hair had come undone, dark waves falling around her shoulders like a curtain. She'd removed her shoes hours ago, her feet aching from standing and pacing and trying to make sense of the senseless. The breaking point came when she finally gathered courage to approach the sitting room door. "Lennox?" she whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion and heartbreak. "Did I do something wrong? Are you regretting this?" The silence that followed felt like death itself. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion she couldn't decode. "Verena, please, just give me until morning. I can explain everything then." Her hand fell from the door handle. In that charged quiet, everything she'd feared about herself seemed confirmed. She wasn't enough. She'd never been enough. The scared little girl inside her had been right all along. She pressed her back against the door and slid down until she sat on the cold floor, wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. The clock ticked on, indifferent to her breaking heart. But as the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, something shifted in the air. Hope, fragile as morning mist, began to stir. What Verena discovers next will shatter everything you think you know about love. Comment below. Have you ever misunderstood someone's actions? Dawn crept through the curtains like a gentle promise, painting the room in soft gold and rose. Verena had fallen asleep against the door, her wedding dress a cloud of wrinkled silk around her. The sound of the sitting room door opening slowly woke her, and she looked up to find Lennox standing there, holding a weathered leather journal in his trembling hands. His dark hair was disheveled, his tie long discarded, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Red-rimmed and raw with emotion, holding a vulnerability that made her heart race with questions she'd been too afraid to ask. "Verena," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "May I sit with you?" She nodded, not trusting her voice, and watched as this powerful man, this billionaire who commanded boardrooms and built empires, lowered himself to the floor beside her like a penitent seeking forgiveness. "Tonight was not a rejection of you," he began, clutching the journal like a lifeline. "It was a gift of understanding, one that took me hours to fully comprehend myself." She searched his face, seeing pain that matched her own. "I don't understand." Lennox opened the journal, its pages yellow with age and filled with his careful handwriting. "This belonged to my mother before she left. I've been writing in it ever since, trying to make sense of everything." He took a shaky breath. "Tonight, I wrote about you, about us, about why I couldn't what?" The words came out broken, afraid. "Couldn't risk hurting you the way I've been hurt, the way you've been hurt." His fingers traced the journal's edge. "Verena, I've been watching you for 2 years, not in some calculating way, but in the way a man falls in love, completely, helplessly. I've seen your courage and your kindness, but I've also seen your pain." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What pain?" "The way you flinch when people raise their voices, how you apologize for taking up space, the nightmares you think I don't notice." His voice grew gentler. "The way you told me about your parents' conditional love, about feeling like you had to earn affection. Tonight, during the reception, I watched you deflect comments about your worth, saw you shrink when people made assumptions about what I got by marrying you." Tears began to fall again, but different this time. Not from rejection, but from being truly seen. "I realized something terrible," Lennox continued. "If I had done what tradition expected, If I had brought you to this bed tonight, driven by desire and societal pressure, I might have accidentally recreated every dynamic that ever made you feel worthless. I might have taken instead of cherishing, demanded instead of offering. But I wanted. I know what you wanted, he said gently, but I needed you to know that you are enough in every way without having to prove anything. Not your beauty, not your desirability, not your worth as a wife. You are complete exactly as you are. He opened the journal to a page filled with fresh ink. I wrote this while you were sleeping. He cleared his throat and began to read. Verena deserves a love that heals, not one that takes. She deserves a husband who sees her wounds and tends them gently, not one who might accidentally tear them open in passion. I know what it's like to be abandoned, to feel unwanted. My mother's leaving taught me that love could disappear without warning. My father's drinking showed me that pain could make people cruel. His voice cracked, but he continued. I built walls so high that I forgot how to let people in. But Verena, she didn't climb my walls or break them down. She simply loved me until I wanted to build a door. Tonight, I choose to love her the same way, not by taking what I want, but by giving what she needs. Verena's hand covered her mouth as understanding washed over her. You were protecting me. I was protecting us both. He set the journal aside and turned to face her fully. My father never learned to love without possession. He needed my mother to validate his worth, and when she couldn't bear that burden anymore, she left. I swore I would never make someone I loved carry the weight of my healing. But what about your healing? She whispered. That's what I'm learning, he said, reaching out slowly, asking permission with his eyes before touching her face. True love transcends the physical. It says you matter more than my desires and your healing comes before my gratification. I don't need you to complete me, Verena. I need you to know that you're already whole. She leaned into his touch, finally understanding. So when we're ready, he confirmed, it will be because we choose each other from a place of wholeness, not need. Because we want to share our joy, not fill our emptiness. The sunrise painted their faces in gold, and for the first time since their wedding began, Verena felt like a bride, not because of what was expected, but because of what was freely given. Love that honored her scars instead of ignoring them. Love that said, you are enough, in the silence between heartbeats. In the weeks that followed their extraordinary wedding night, Verena experienced a metamorphosis that went deeper than she'd ever thought possible. What felt like rejection transformed into the deepest affirmation of her worth. Not because someone desired her body, but because someone treasured her soul. The change began with small moments. When she caught her reflection in mirrors, instead of cataloging flaws, she saw the woman Lennox described in his journal entries. Radiant, worthy, complete. The critical voices from her childhood grew quieter, replaced by his gentle words. You are enough, in every way. Their mornings became sacred. Hand in hand, they walked through the dew-kissed gardens of Caldwell Manor, talking about everything and nothing. Under the sprawling branches of ancient oak trees, they shared stories they'd never told anyone. Childhood fears, dreams abandoned, hopes reborn. I used to think love meant proving myself worthy, Verena confessed one morning, watching sunrise paint the sky in watercolor hues. With you, I'm learning it means being accepted as I am. Lennox squeezed her hand. I thought love meant keeping people at arm's length to protect them. You've taught me that real protection comes from coming closer, not pulling away. They were building trust, brick by brick, creating a foundation stronger than passion, deeper than desire. Some evenings they simply sat together reading, her head on his shoulder, finding intimacy in shared silence. Other nights, they talked until dawn, exploring the landscapes of each other's hearts with the patience of archaeologists uncovering precious artifacts. The ripple effects of their story began to spread in unexpected ways. When friends asked about their honeymoon with knowing smiles, expecting tales of romantic passion, Verena and Lennox shared a different kind of story. One about patience, understanding, and love that honored wounds instead of ignoring them. Their closest friends, initially puzzled, began to recognize something revolutionary in their approach. Marcus, Lennox's business partner, confided that he'd rushed into physical intimacy with his wife after their wedding. driven more by expectation than genuine readiness. "You two are showing us there's another way," he admitted. Sarah, Verena's college roommate, called after hearing their story. "I wish someone had taught me that I didn't have to perform love," she said through tears. "That I could just be loved." Word spread quietly through their social circles, not as gossip, but as hope. Couples dealing with trauma, individuals struggling with self-worth, friends wrestling with relationship pressures, began reaching out for guidance. Verena and Lennox found themselves accidentally becoming advocates for a deeper understanding of intimacy and healing. "We're challenging something fundamental," Verena observed during one of their evening walks. "The idea that physical connection should come before emotional safety is built. Society teaches us that love is about taking what we want," Lennox replied. "We're learning it's about giving what's needed." Inspired by their journey, Verena began keeping her own journal. Her entries became a chronicle of transformation, documenting the daily miracles of being truly seen and accepted. "Today, I laughed without calculating whether I was being too loud. I wore a dress because I loved the color, not because I needed to impress anyone. Lennox looked at me like I was his favorite sunrise. I'm beginning to understand that true love doesn't demand validation of insecurities. It makes them irrelevant. We held each other during my nightmare last night, not to make it stop, but to remind me I wasn't alone in the darkness. This is intimacy, being vulnerable without fear of abandonment. 3 months married, and I finally understand our wedding night. He didn't reject me. He chose me. Chose to love me in the way I needed most, even when it cost him what he wanted most." Their love story became a quiet revolution, proving that the strongest foundations are built not in moments of passion, but in countless acts of patience, understanding, and radical acceptance. They were rewriting the rules of romance, one gentle day at a time. Friends began calling them for advice. Therapists referenced their story in sessions. A local marriage counselor asked them to share their experience with other couples. What had begun as one man's decision to honor his wife's healing journey had become a beacon of hope for anyone who'd ever felt broken, unworthy, or afraid of love. 5 years later, Lennox and Verena Caldwell had quietly revolutionized how people thought about love, marriage, and healing. Their advocacy for emotional connection over ritual had sparked conversations in therapy offices, university classrooms, and living rooms across the world. They'd established the Caldwell Foundation for Emotional Wellness, funding research into trauma-informed relationships and supporting couples who needed time to heal before diving into traditional expectations. Their approach was simple: love should nurture, not pressure. "Intimacy is as much about spaces left unfilled as passion that flows," Verena often said during their speaking engagements. "Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is patience." Their story had inspired thousands struggling with societal pressures about relationships, sexuality, and worthiness. Letters poured in from couples who'd given themselves permission to move slowly, from individuals who'd learned to value emotional safety over physical expectations, from therapists who'd changed their approach to working with trauma survivors. The promise Lennox made that dawn morning, "You are enough," had become their foundation, stronger than any vow spoken at an altar. Their love continued its gentle unfolding, each day revealing new depths of trust built through patience and understanding. They'd learned that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey shared. When Verena occasionally struggled with old insecurities, Lennox didn't try to fix her. He simply held space for her feelings. When his abandonment fears surfaced during stressful periods, she didn't take it personally. She reminded him that choosing to stay was always a choice, never an obligation. Their physical intimacy, when it finally blossomed naturally months into their marriage, had been everything they'd hoped. Not because they'd waited, but because they'd waited together, building trust that made vulnerability feel safe rather than terrifying. The most profound expressions of love honor who we are at our core, Lennox reflected during a recent interview. Not who we think we should be, or who society expects us to be, but who we truly are. Wounds, fears, dreams, and all. Their legacy wasn't just personal transformation, but cultural shift. Therapists began incorporating their principles into practice. Wedding planners started conversations about emotional readiness alongside dress fittings. Marriage preparation courses added modules about trauma-informed intimacy. Most importantly, they'd proven that healing happens when hearts are free to be vulnerable without fear of judgment or abandonment. True intimacy blossoms from acceptance, not expectation. Love doesn't demand performance. It offers presence. Their wedding night, once a source of confusion and pain, had become their greatest gift to each other and to the world. It proved that sometimes the most radical act of love is saying, "We don't have to do this the way everyone else does. We can choose our own path." Today, couples around the globe were choosing patience over pressure, understanding over assumption, healing over hurrying. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that they are enough. Subscribe to Hearts Unbroken for more tales that heal and inspire. What's your definition of true love? Tell us in the comments below.